Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sierra Division AMA. I'm your host. My name is Greg. I'm the COO here at Sierra Division. I'm also the acting Academy Director for those of you who happen to be part of the Academy and recognize me from interactions there. I am joined, as always, by my good buddy and friend, the CEO of Sierra Division, the man responsible for all things beautiful here at the studio, Mr. Jacob Norris. How are you, my friend?
Pretty good. I'm actually getting excited because it'll be my first Gamescom coming up this year.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to hopefully even maybe meeting some of the community too. So that'll be cool.
Yeah, we've had a couple people reach out on the community chat about that, so hopefully that ends up being a good time. Dude, this is an exciting one. So we're joined today by Mr. Hugh, a material artist. And Hugh, if you don't mind, I'm going to let you go through and kind of introduce yourself and talk about your credentials, if you don't mind, my friend.
Sure thing. Yeah, my name is Hugh. I'm a material artist. I just celebrated my 10 years in the game industry, which is at this point a really big godsend.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've worked in games. First started, I went to the Art Institute in Los Angeles, RIP to that one. Graduated, got my bachelor's. From there, I went into going into being an associate tech artist at Infinity Ward and then Sledgehammer Games, working on Call of Duty Infinite Warfare and Call of Duty World War II. Then from there, I worked at a furniture company that was doing this kind of like Snapchat augmented reality thing called House. They were doing this like view the furniture in your room type of thing. So I worked there for a little bit. And then for about 4 years, I worked at Sinzaro Games, where I worked on Asgard's Wrath 2, Marvel Powers United. It was definitely an interesting time there. And then let's see, I also worked at PlayStation Studios Visual Arts, which was probably by far one of my most favorite places I got to work at, because I got to work on The Last of Us Part 1 remake. I also got to work on Concord, RIP to that one. And then I got to work on Ben Studios, one of their projects, which unfortunately got canceled. But from there, I've now been working over a year at this tech company called Zero Matter. The only thing I can really say is that we're a simulations company and that we're doing some really cool and interesting things. We have a lot of folks from the games background, so I'm not the only one games person there. There's a lot of folks from like Sledgehammer Games, Call of Duty, Midwinter. So I'm among company basically.
Yeah. I thought that was going to be a cool thing to get to discuss a little bit today, because we talked a lot in the community about different opportunities that exist for artists, right? Obviously, game dev is number one. We're a game dev company ourselves, but it's one of those things to where it's great to be able to hear different avenues, different ways that people can use their skill sets and different ways that it kind of works out and what kind of fun things they might be able to do. But that's enough about that. I know that we're going to be able to get into all of that. But apart from that, as far as Jacob, what questions do you have? You said you had some fun ones as far as like ways you wanted to kick us off, or was it as we were going along?
Yeah, just as we're going along, but I guess just to touch back on, the Concord thing, maybe it's a cop out, but it's always kind of nice for me that as an artist, we don't necessarily take the blame, and we can still show some really cool portfolio pieces, but you can always just say, oh, game design, or oh, it was bad marketing, or oh, it was whatever else, but like the art was good, right?
Oh yeah, no, I agree. Like
Yeah.
honestly, like one thing that I always find very funny is that sometimes bad is in like when a game does not sell well, they have sometimes the best artwork. Like Concord has been one of the most recent ones. I mean, the fact that you look at some of the technical stuff that they did. I mean, the game ran like a dream. It was great. We did a lot of cool stuff with material layering, especially for some of the characters that we had to work on. There was even like CPD and all these other like kind of technical things on the material side that was like really like not talked about as much. And then you can go a bit further back to like Godfall, where my friend Kurt Kupser, sorry, Kurt Kupser, he worked on some really cool and interesting shader stuff for that game as well. And even going back further, like the Order 1886, like that game still to this day is probably one of my most, looks so good for the time that it was. And a lot of people took what they learned from it, even if it was a failure in that sense, that it's inspired more artists for that, which I really love, essentially.
Yeah, and I guess like that's something that everyone's always going back and forth on in games today too. Is like, do you focus on the beauty, or do you focus on the gameplay? And time and time again, it always comes back to like the game has to be fun first. But when magic happens is when you have a really fun game, but you also have like the artists there to be able to make it beautiful. And when the two come together, then it's like, all right, this is, the critically acclaimed stuff that you see from some of the studios you've had a chance to contribute.
Basically becomes like that in all encompassing, like you just get so deep into it. It becomes so immersive. Once the environment matches up with that gameplay, it's absolutely huge. It makes a huge difference as far as the experience for the people playing the game. We have our first question.
Yeah.
You from there?
Oh, okay. I was just
You
going
can
to
go.
jump in
You
real
can go.
quick.
Please.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm stealing someone's turn here, but here we go.
We got time. We'll be good.
All right. Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, as far as where you're coming from, have you also done, stylized work, or have you mostly focused on realistic, or maybe the breadth of kind of the experience of different types of art you've worked on?
So the most I've ever gone down stylized has been kind of like, fantasy realism. Like, everything in a weird way is stylized because we've never really hit super realistic. I mean, you see Call of Duty, it's still like we're getting more and more realistic. We're about to see literally like the danger flakes of like whatever the characters can be. But like, we literally like
stylized danger flakes.
Yeah, everything is stylized to me. Like I tell it to my because I didn't really talk about it, but like I teach as well, and so like one of the places I teach at is Laguna College of Arts and Design, and for a lot of them, they are trained more like a Blizzard artist. And when I have to explain like PBR and things, like there's a realism to it, but you can also do PBR with stylized stuff. But yeah, so far my breadth has always been realism. I mean, I like to try my hand at it. Like one of these days, I would love to do something kind of more like those old kind of concept arts from like Legend of Zelda or Mario from like the 80s and 90s. I would love to try my hand at that, but that's like maybe when I have time, honestly.
Yeah. Did you ever come from any background of like drawing or traditional art yourself, or has it always mostly been on the digital side?
So the only drawing I ever did was when I was younger, I used to do freehanding of like Yu-Gi-Oh cards, like because that was like the art that I got to see, or even like anime in some instances. But then like a lot of it was Legos, which is why you can see kind of like Lego stuff like right here, and then on the other frames you can see some of the other stuff. So Legos, drawing, and then liking video games kind of blended into why not make it though. It led into my first stint was character art, which I did not like at all.
It's always so funny. Like almost everybody that we talk to, they usually start in one place and end up somewhere totally different. I don't think we've
Exactly.
had anybody who was like, "Oh, this is what I'm gonna do," and then they just did it. Like every single person has always kind of had to experiment and try this and try that and see kind of what's fun for you.
Yeah, it's a touch of discovery, a touch of making it yourself, a touch of just kind of making yourself what you need to be in order to do the thing. Like it seems to be kind of all of the above. That actually bleeds in really well to the question. I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, Jacob. But how was it then that you got into materials? Well done, well done. And so, how did you get into material art? What was the path? You mentioned character art. How did you end up?
So how it ended up being was so first I started with characters. Turns out everything I draw looks like Gary Busey, so I kind of said no to that. Then I went into what picked up really was environment arts, and like that's kind of like where you gotta get into the big three of like tech, character, environments. And I realized that like at near the end of my time at the Art Institute, PBR was becoming like the hot thing to know, and I was still being taught like Photoshop and do it like stylized in Unreal Engine, like in UDK basically. And so I taught myself like using Marmoset Toolbag, trying to learn how to render things, and materials just kind of clicked basically. But it was me trying to just do more environment work with it. And then of course when Substance Designer, like when I think it was right around the time when Uncharted 4 came around, that's when you really started to see this huge boom of people really wanted to pick up on Substance. And so taking my kind of fun for PBR and doing that led me into knowing what PBR is, how to author it with or without like Substance, or knowing like all these different things is what led me into a tech art role, which is essentially a junior texture artist, because 2016, we didn't really have those roles at that time. So it really kind of helped get a good foot by knowing the technical side of it first before I got into more of the art side of materials.
When people hear material artist, I know like different people sometimes can think different things as well because, of course, substance designer and material balls like that's very common first go to, but then material is also often interchanged with the word shader in Unreal Engine. So material instance like do you feel that like in order to be a material artist, you also need to have an understanding of shaders and materials and like material nodes, or can you just like create the tiling textures and create the trim sheets? Like, are you needing that kind of engine experience to go along with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone kind of should know just a little bit about the engine. Not like you have to know the ins and outs of like Nanite or something, but like knowing some technical stuff is really good because, like, especially if you want to go into games, you have to know kind of performance and how to be technical. And so, like, knowing the difference between what a smart material, and a shader is a huge difference to know as a material artist. Because when I was at Bend, there was a bunch of old heads there. I love them. They're very great at their craft, but trying to explain to them the difference between like what a smart material is inside of Substance Painter versus a shader inside of the engine is a night and day comparison.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess that would be kind of like a follow-up to that. Did you start on the engine side with shaders, or did you start with more like, substance nodes and the classic, material graphs over there? And do you feel that
I
they interchangeable at all?
Yeah, no, they definitely are. Like, there's some kind of understanding of it, and that's kind of how when I was the class that I would teach at LCAD was a materials class, and so when I would teach them Substance because it's a node-based editor and there's very similar kind of methodologies to it, I would also lean towards it with Unreal Engine because if you at least know how plugging A into B equals C, it's very similar inside of Unreal Engine. And so when I first started, it was in UDK, so understanding how the material editor worked there and learning how to get a material to like and be emissive and actually flicker and stuff like that was like one of my first real shaders, and then making like a water shader, and then I'm like, okay, this is starting to make sense. Then came like Substance Designer and understanding how like taking this graph and giving it math makes brick walls and stuff. Like, it's like a weird thing to think about, but it's like, yeah, we're using all of this mathematics stuff to actually make something really cool and interesting.
I guess something else that kind of goes along with it. When a lot of people think about material artists and they see these beautiful shader balls, oftentimes I feel like the portfolio shader balls that you'll create are going to be different than what you're actually going to generate in production. So you'll need to like ensure tiling works properly and like there's not repetitive elements within it and things like that. It can kind of make I guess it's better more of a question, like, do you feel sometimes that, it can make the actual creation work itself, like, if you're just making concrete and it's super simple, does it take the fun out of it at all when they're like, "Oh, don't put that, like, amazing crack in over there and the really cool, like, pits and the specific piece of gum and the wrapper that you're throwing in because of like, oh, you're gonna see the tiling and that," or is it still enjoyable and you get to bring those elements back in, like, another way?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like it's again, it's fun and interesting, especially because like from a game standpoint, like when you make this stuff, sometimes it's not always going to be also that you're using the stuff that you make. It's going to be something that like maybe someone else brought in, and so trying to find something creative where we need to make sure these materials look good, that to make sure they're also tiling really well, where they're not too noticeable, but then we can understand, okay, if I can't have cracks in the tileable, what else can I do? And then that's where you have to kind of get into the puzzle brain of like, maybe I could do a decal, maybe I could do some vertex painting, maybe I could do this or that, or just try and find something else a little bit different. So it kind of is one of those things where as a material artist, you shouldn't just only do like a material ball or material cylinder or whatever, and try and put it into the game engine itself and actually start to really try and think of it as, I'm a material artist working on this game. How would I try and make this look just as good?
Yeah, I guess we were chatting. Maybe it was with Peyton about that as well. Like, that do you need to have any environment experience in order to be a material artist, or can you just jump straight into the material side and like figure out from a distance how those things kind of work together?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so. material art has always been kind of considered like a fragment of a much larger discipline. It's now in and of itself a actual discipline because you have to know how materials work, how to set up textures, compression, all the technical stuff. It is always good to have a background with something else, not definitely like general artist where you have to like know character tech and all this, but if you're come from an environment art background, it's good to know that because you're gonna probably work like, especially with like how like Naughty Dog, how we would be paired with an environment artist typically. You would always have to make sure that what are they working on. If maybe they're busy on a task, I can help fill in for like doing some UV work or something because I know how to do that kind of stuff. Or if they need something to make modular, I'll know how to set that up because you also need to know how like textures work with modular kits. And so that's kind of like another thing to note. And it's the same thing also for characters too. Like there's a great texture artist named Drew Harrison. She's she has background as being a character artist, but she actually has material knowledge because she's working on like cloth shading or trying to understand how can we make this like tileable texture work with character clothing and actually having like stitching and this and that on there. You have to know all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to always just have metaphors that relate to food. So hopefully nobody's hungry right now. But
it's a little too early. It's way too early for us to be thinking about that.
All right, cool. So it's safe to bring it up, and I'm not going to describe anything delicious anyway, so it's okay. I'm not going to describe anything, crispy and succulent.
You're just adding in adjectives at this point now.
I guess like if you tried to be a chef, but at the same time you never eat the food that you're making, that would be like, a material artist who's never actually putting the work into the environments. That technically it's possible, but at the same time, if you're not going to experience that, then you're just basically taking the feedback of, like you said, at Naughty Dog, somebody kind of telling you, oh, I'd need the trim sheets a bit larger here, or I'd need, the tiling to work a bit better over in this way. You just need a lot more feedback and almost kind of like um, a journey to get to the point to where you'd start learning those things yourself if you're just practicing off to the side. So yeah, I mean, I guess like it's just an interesting thought. Like it's still technically possible, but maybe it's a little bit more difficult to go that route.
Yeah, it's like, if you have a problem, like say like, hey, our level, all the materials look a little weird and I wonder why. And it's like, what could it be? Like, and it's like, oh, it could be textile density. And textile density is not just a texture specific thing, it's also a UV specific thing on meshes. So it's having an understanding of all this extra stuff beside it with like geometry and modeling is a big key thing to, kind of get your head around as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's another thing that comes back to the idea of everybody starting in one place and then leading their way down to, material art or character art or whatever it is that in some way, so many of these specialties kind of cross over each other anyways. And so even if you're a material artist or even if you're an environment artist or character artist, it helps to have, environment knowledge, or it helps to have like the Unreal shader knowledge. And if you're going to show off your renders, it helps to have the lighting experience. So it's like, I guess I'm also thinking, is it going to be overwhelming sometimes for people when they hear like, oh, I also need to be doing this when I'm trying to study this? Is it okay to not be good at everything?
Yeah, I mean,
still be good at what you're trying to do.
I think everyone has like a focus for things, and like, yeah, it's good to have like some general knowledge here and there. Like, you don't have to be good at it. Like, there are some guys that I know that like they're very good at substance designer, but maybe they're not good at shaders or something like that. Or maybe they're like better at like understanding like workflow and pipeline. Like, they may not be the most best artist, but they can at least know how to dictate and set a pipeline for making material libraries for things. But like, if you're not that good at UV work, that's fine, as long as you understand what it is and that you can help understand that problem. It's kind of the thing of my wife, she is Mexican, and so I can understand Spanish, but I cannot speak it.
So when you're in trouble.
What's going.
Yeah,
I know when I'm in trouble, but like it's kind of like my way of like thinking of it like that. Like, guess what? I know what to expect on here because I at least understand what it can be, basically. And then that way, like, you don't have to be good at it.
No, that's a really good analogy because, like, environment artists also need to understand level design, but they don't necessarily have to be good at it. I like that. I'm gonna start using that more. Um, I guess I can say the same in the sense that, yeah, my wife's Finnish, and so I can kind of understand Finnish, but I definitely can't speak it.
It's also, in a weird way, it's like it's understanding body language, because it's like you have to know, like, hey, if something's going on, and it's like you can kind of tell that there's something going on, like say in a level, in a sense,
Yeah.
you can kind of tell something's not flowing, something's not looking right. That's that body language of the level telling you that there's something that needs to be fixed, or there's something that needs to be worked on. So you can definitely try and say, hey, maybe let's start to maybe adjust maybe the roughness on some of the textures here, or maybe adjust the way the trim is kind of laid out in a way so that we can try and help fix it to make it look better and kind of feel much better.
But was there any kind of like specific moment for you, or a specific teacher or project or anything where maybe at a time up until then you were struggling with an aspect of materials, or you weren't able to kind of get over a hurdle, but then just something kind of clicked for you? Or did you just find it to be a slow, gradual improvement over time?
It definitely was like at first like a tricky thing, because at the Art Institute we had a teacher named Nick Marks, who, he was the guy that had this group called the Game Wizards, and basically, like, he taught us like, oh, we're gonna learn Marmoset, we're gonna learn this. I wasn't that good at Marmosets, and the texture program he was teaching us was Dedo. So it's like it was a plugin that was built into or it was not built in, but you can add it into Photoshop. And I would just kind of grab like, this looks kind of cool, and I'll just put it on there, and I wasn't really meshing with like understanding how the materials worked. But then when I got into Substance Designer, where I have to kind of understand these materials in a way where I have to break it down to its most fundamental shape, just like how every environment artist has to break down in assets to like simple primitives. You have to be the same way too. So like if I'm like the material I'll show a little bit later is subway tile. So subway tile, like you have to break it down to the most fundamental shape, which is typically square or something. And then
Yeah.
you have to break down the other surface elements of like, are there gradations? Is there cracks? Is there like other little shapes like pitting or warbling from the surface? You have to understand like breaking down these things into its much smaller pieces, almost like taking an element and breaking it down to protons, neutrons, and electrons.
Yeah, and I guess so then when you're in the class, like the teacher kind of helped you to break down materials that way, and that's when it really started to click better for you, or?
Yeah, because it wasn't just like I'm gonna break down albedo, normal, roughness, that kind of stuff. It was like, look at what this object is made of. Like, say if you have a weapon, you got to break it down to first its most fundamental, like what kind of material it is. There's a metal, there's a leather, there's a this or that. Break it down that way, and then start to understand what other things are needed to make it look from like a normal metal to like a sword's metal or a gun's metal or something. And so you have to add those natural things of like wear and tear. And then you also have to think about what kind of metal is it? Because if it's not typically like an iron sword, maybe it's a copper sword, you're not going to have brown rust. You're going to have patina. You're going to have green. So breaking it down even further to know kind of these like little things, like it's going to be very much helpful. And especially for like us artists, like nowadays, we have to be very meticulous, whether you're doing stylized or not. If you're building something that's based in like the United States or in Finland or in wherever, you got to make sure that you have all the little details. Like, hey, if you put United States based, wall outlets, and then you put it into a Finnish apartment, it's going to look weird. Little things like that.
Maybe an American lives there, like.
Yeah, exactly.
I was about to say, maybe he just feels at home. Maybe he's just trying to provide himself where he's from.
Where
you saying my place is weird, man? Or like,
no.
Sorry, Chief, just joking around.
No, but
I'm just kidding.
But we had something like that where when we were working on Ben's project, where again, I'm not going to say what the project was, but there was a level that was based in Tasmania. And Tasmania, we were like, I don't know what a Tasmanian wall outlet looks like. So we had to Google what that was. And so we had to figure out like how these different things are, because it's like I think it's technically the Oceanus region of the world. So it's like you have to use a different type of outlet versus like somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Asia, or somewhere here in the United States. So little things like that is kind of more welcoming to understand that you have to break things down to really understand why it is the way it is, essentially.
Yeah, That makes sense. And yeah, as Greg said, we're just joking, of course.
Yeah,
No,
there's
no, no, no. I don't think we're gonna get into a fist fight over different outlets.
Don't.
All right, that's good. Our outlets are the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
Go ahead.
I don't want to get into an outlet conversation, but I'll just quickly say that I do enjoy European outlets because like it actually goes into the wall. So when you put something in, it stays in there really nicely. And I don't know
Oh.
how many of my
Oh, you
American
don't have to worry
plugs
about this
they
like
just
little
sit on the wall and they're just like falling off all the time or falling out, and like toasters that you have to, plug in a funny way and bed the prongs out. Like problems in America that, people in Europe don't have to deal with.
Trust me, as a material guy, I have to focus on understanding metrics, and it's like, why does this make so much more sense than everything we've ever done? And I have to explain this
Yeah.
to people. I'm like, that's kind of how it is. Weirdly, how it is. Like we're the only country that still technically uses imperial versus metric. I don't know.
At least we have, really nice beaches and quality Mexican food. And
That's true. I bet that's one thing you probably miss not being in California anymore is the fact that like you don't have real good Mexican food anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm,
there's
yeah.
some inspired material balls I could come up with from those, probably. Crazy substance materials.
Oh yeah.
So what's the
So
marriage like between like material artists and environment artists? And how do you work together typally? Is that like a path that you normally see people eventually get into materials, or
Yeah,
talk
I
to me a
mean,
little bit about that
you
relationship?
know, so it also it kind of more or less starts kind of where you are in school, basically. So
Okay.
in most cases, you have like a texture class, but it's like sometimes it's just a simple like substance painter class where you just understand what it is to texture an object and understand what the basic like albedo, roughness, all that kind of stuff is. When you want to go into like the discipline of materials, it's kind of more of what the substance designer class is, because you really have to kind of go into like the fundamentals of what is the surface essentially. And so you first start off as like, do you want to be like, you actually probably more or less start into modeling than anything else. Like every class we've probably ever taken, like Jacob, I think you're also an art institute grad as well. RIP.
yep, Art Institute of San Diego.
So like, we all took a fundamentals of like intro to 3D modeling. And like, I actually, before even that, I was in high school, I was taught Lightwave 3D, which is like, I didn't know UVs, I didn't know topology, but like I understood how to model something. And so I think that's where you kind of first go into the first basic discipline of like environments or characters. And then that's kind of where you mire into like, do you want to go into like prop art or materials or tech art, even of that? And so it kind of has to kind of almost be like a tree where you start to go onto the different branches. And so you will have some sort of basic fundamental knowledge, unless people nowadays who are self-taught just jump right into it. But you can kind of tell sometimes like, hey, they only know substance designer, but they don't know the fundamentals of like UVing. That's where you'll start to kind of see them have these issues, because, if you don't know what, say, modularity is, or what even using secondary UV sets is, that's where you start to see the problem of like, oh, now you're starting to kind of lack in that kind of fundamental problem solving type of thing. And so I think that's kind of like one of the big things where, again, it's almost like in sense dialects. It's like you're almost there, but you're not quite there because of there's certain differences on there. You're on the same side of things, but you're not like miring together on these things.
I would be interested to know as well. It might lead into your demo, or it might just be a totally different question. Do you have like a favorite material that you've ever made? Whether it was the actual building process of it itself that you like overcame some like intense challenge that you were trying to figure out how to create a specific shape, or if you just really liked the final product of it and you're like, this is my favorite and like best material that just looks really cool.
I mean, do we have favorites for our children? I don't think we want this. I mean,
Depends on the day.
I'm
I
just
can
trying to
answer
think,
depends on the
like,
day.
I
I'm just
mean,
saying.
when I think about it, like it's almost like even not just like a material, but it's also just like what's cool. And I honestly, one of the ones I really like is my terracotta material, because that was one where I'm like, it's been a while since I've actually posted a single substance material by myself, and like without having to be a part of a level or something. And so what was really cool about that one, and it's also kind of what I'll go into with the subway tile, is that like it's layered in a sense where like and it's almost fundamentally how you should make materials. You start off with creating your, of course, your terracotta like material, like the clean version. And then I had it layered with like damaged stuff on top of it, where you'll start to see the broken terracotta tile and this and that. And so it's very interesting to kind of, see the process of something like that, because most folks tend to think you just make everything completely from scratch, and not like I, can make a dirt one time or make a crack one time and then start to blend that together with other things. It's almost like kind of like material layering, but you're just doing it through the texture authoring process and not through something inside of like Unreal Engine.
Yeah, like if you come up with a really nice, crack modifier, then you can basically just copy that into any of your other materials, or even create like a simple, what are those SBARs that you can just have?
I just call it an archive file. Honestly, it's such a big word just to even do SBSAR type of thing. But like a good example is like if anyone has a chance to look at the Vincent Desrosiers or
DeRosier?
Yeah, there we go.
I don't know. Maybe if he is French.
If he pops up, like, we'll say Vincent. Vincent did a really good GDC 2026 thing where he showcased his like vinyl floor, where he first made the vinyl itself, not even like the floor parts. And then he made tintable values where he made like a gray one, a green one, and then he layered them together with like the details of like the vinyl, and then like the damaged vinyl, and then dirt, and then leaves, like, and it was all different materials that he's made on top of it, basically. So it's really interesting to kind of see all that layering kind of happening on top of it. And some people don't tend to think of that way. They think of like, I have to make it all from scratch every single time. And that's just not the smartest way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Work smarter, not harder.
Mm-hmm.
And even sometimes the people that it's kind of funny, because then like you get some people that are maybe saying that they're kind of lazy and they don't want to do the work, and so they come up with these other workflows, but then they'll spend like however long on this workaround that then ends up speeding up the workflow so much. And it's like, okay, you say you're lazy, but you spent like a month working on this one thing.
It's a weird thing,
for like endless hours, just so you can spend like 2 hours on everything else.
Some of the fastest techniques that we've ever seen has always been from the most like procrastinated people ever, because they want to find the quickest answer to it, basically. And so, hey, shout out to the procrastinators. We actually have a good pipeline because of it.
You know how to work quickly if you have to.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's weird, and like I think this is a thing that I heard Bill Gates say once, to where he's like, he kind of likes lazy people, and it's one of the strangest things you'd ever hear, because the environment that I heard that in the first time were not the type of people you'd ever hear say that, but they were very much like what you just described, to where it says they know how to find the solutions to the problem almost quicker than anyone else, and so because of that, it's like they can get away with it. It's not fair, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things, like, we have to think about problem solving. Like, that's kind of like one of the big things. Like, you have to understand that, whenever there's going to be some sort of, this or that type of problem, like, you might think of it in a weird way. Like when I talk about material layering, people are like, well, why don't I just make my stuff inside of Substance Painter still? And it's like, well, that's one good thing. But then guess what? What if you need to quickly make new versions of something else that's made of wood? Guess what? Because you made your only wood asset inside of Substance Painter, you can't reuse that. Whereas, like, if you make a nice, good tileable wood, you can throw that thing on anything and you're good to go, basically.
Yeah, and then just change
Smarter, not harder.
grain size or
Exactly.
color, or if it's glossy, like it's varnished or not, and makes it easy. With what you're looking to share today, would you want to jump into that, and then
Sure
we can start taking some questions afterwards? I think there's a couple starting to pop up.
Yeah, we've got a couple. So while you're pulling that up, you mind if I put you on the spot here, Hugh? I ask you a question while you're pulling that up.
Sure, why not?
Multitask.
Let's make it.
I'm already on the spot, so let's go for it.
Yes. Okay. First question.
How can we make the answer bad and the stream bad at the same time? I'm just kidding. We're being lazy procrastinators.
Exactly. I know.
Maybe coming up with a great solution.
Basically.
He's actually putting together his presentation as we speak. Oh, no, never mind. You're already sharing your screen.
But I mean, if you want to ask the question, you totally can.
I'm sorry. I'm too busy joking. So Cameron, he'd asked, I'm trying to branch out. into environment art, but currently struggling with approaching materials. My previous work is heavily prop focused and therefore has been textured bespoke one-to-one. What tips do you have to get out of this mindset and make it approaching environment textures less daunting? That's a really good question. Thank you, Cameron. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I think like one of the first things is that, you know, because when everyone thinks when they jump into environments, I need to make the biggest, widest, largest like environment scene of all time.
We see it all the time. Yeah.
You don't want to do that. Like it's honestly, you waste more time by making a super large environment because, you know, think about how studios are. It takes 100-something people because, you know, 100 people on a world art team can make like, you know, 4 or 5 kilometers and it takes them years to do. So doing something much smaller is easier to manage. The first thing would be is like going into modularity. You know, modularity allows you to easily break down by making like material slots and stuff. So you can actually just do like some very fundamental things like, okay, I can make a nice fundamental tileable, like going to these references. Like most of the stuff that you see here for like subway stations are typically modular in a sense that like most of these are just the same kind of wall kind of fabricated piece snapped together and moved together. And that's using like a tile material. Then you have like the mosaic material. And then you have like the ground tile, and then you have like the safety strips, you know, breaking them down again into those little fundamental things. And then thinking about, well, what can I reuse now? Thankfully, one of the easiest ones is you have this like very kind of thick and gloppy paint that you always see on these like kind of girders and pillars in there. So you can reuse that material over and over again wherever you need it to be. Or if you want to, you can make a tile and then just swap out the normal map a little bit here and there so you can reuse some simple assets together. It's kind of one of the things of there's like we artists, what we tend to do is we tend to like paint over and block out like what are the most reusable parts of an environment. Like we tend to like take our reference or take a photo and then just like go into Photoshop and just quickly say in red, here's like this one material. And then if it's being reused again, you don't want to ever paint that red again. And then you'll do like yellow or green or blue until you have all the basic unique assets all taken care of. And you'll see what's modular left, essentially. And so by making a smaller scene that can be more modular and be able to reuse more assets, I think that's probably one of the better approaches to kind of getting into this kind of mindset, basically. Reusability is like kind of the key thing for games nowadays anyways. Like you can still be bespoke in a way, but you have to be smart with how you reuse the assets to make it look unique versus being like fully made inside a Substance Painter.
I love everything that you just said because it ties in so well to what we've talked about numerous times. I have a lot of conversations with artists, aspiring artists who are curious about courses, Hugh. And I think a consistent theme that I see, like people asking about either one-on-one mentorship, asking about Alex's class, etc., or Ben's now, they'll consistently ask, it's like, hey, how do I complete this within the time frame? And I think like the most difficult thing to communicate, I feel, and you both are welcome to share your opinions on this, but I really feel like for people that are setting out to put together portfolio pieces for environment, we'd be so much better off focusing on the quality rather than the size of the environments. And I think so many people, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to take a one-on-one mentorship. I want to make it as brilliant of a piece as I possibly can. And so their thought process always is, how could I make this big? And the references, everything looks great, but the execution then struggles because they try to bite off maybe a little bit more than they could chew. And so the fact that you brought that up, dude, it's such a good, that's so applicable.
Part of the journey. I think every artist has to go through that. Like we have to fail trying to make a big environment to then learn, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah. It's just like, okay, so you have this massive environment, just go just right there. If you could just scale it into like what your primary focus is and just nail it. I've had so many conversations with artists who've made that switch and they talk about how helpful it was being able to do that. And then you scale up with environments when you have a big team or you have people or you have assets that you're going to use.
It's also like with being because it's especially when you're modular, small is easy. You know, scaling can be harder, and that's why it's like, guess what? If you can do like a small scene, guess what? If you want to scale it to be a bit bigger later on, you totally can, because that's what modularity is. You can take those modular things and then just start to build out like other little, you know, corridors or hallways and just reuse stuff. Like one of my favorite things I remember, let's see if I can find it. It's from this artist named Tiago Klofke. He had probably one of the best like modular things. Like again, this was when I was in school, and so he made this. I'll pull it up real quickly. It's an it's an article from like it's in Unreal Engine 3, and he showcases like how he makes like his these 3 simple trim sets and makes a very modular, very fundamental type of environment with some simple shaders. And goes to show you that like it doesn't need a lot to be made, but it's something that like as long as you plan ahead and think about it, it definitely makes it so much better. And Thiago, he's been around for such a long time, so like he knows like how to work on like modular environments and stuff.
Did you ever see the GDC demo from Torfric for Neon Giant?
No, I haven't yet. Was it this one or was it last year's GDC?
It was so it was like previous before that.
Mhm.
Yeah, so basically way back in the polycount days, I believe it was also Torfric. He wanted to put together an entire environment with a single trim sheet. Everything in it was built with that one trim sheet, and it used like different masks, like a smart setup with his normals, and he was like using even the alpha channels and stuff like that. But ultimately, he did that just for fun on his own in Polycount, and then years later, when he owns a studio, then he ends up doing it across the entire game. So the whole game was actually built with just a single trim sheet and like a kit bash set of assets and stuff. I mean, nobody has to go that extreme when we talk about modularity, but it's interesting to know that it's possible.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to see this kind of stuff. And it's like, again, it's funny because it's like, people that he now works with most likely learn from him on that kind of stuff. Like, it's very interesting. Like when I was working at Naughty or not Naughty, like at PlayStation Visual Arts, I got to work with, of course, Javier Perez and Karen Stanley, who 2 people I learned from their tutorials on materials a long, long time ago. And so it's really interesting to kind of see that the people that you do these tutorials for, you teach, will probably end up being your coworkers and stuff, and they'll have a better idea of like fundamentals. And that's probably one of the things I love about it. It's like there are people now that's, in the later on, if when I'm back in games, back in a game studio, I'll actually be able to probably work directly with them because they've learned so much from that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The knowledge sharing in communities is always great.
Yeah. But yeah, so I have this right here. So one of the things I've been doing, besides like work and teaching stuff, is I have a YouTube series or YouTube, and I'm doing a YouTube series right now where I'm going through how to make a material from scratch, basically. I started with just doing a simple kind of man-made type of material because man-made materials are a lot more easier to get the idea around of understanding substance for the first time than, trying to make like dirt and stuff for the focus. Um, so I started off, I went to New York fairly recently and I took a bunch of photos and photo references. I even also took color correction values, and I don't go anywhere without this thing. This is like attached to me at the hip.
Dude.
I have this. I have not one sometimes, but 2 tape measures in case I lose one. I am very on guard when it comes to like, I'm going to measure everything.
You're set up like a construction worker, like you're a
Yeah,
contractor.
I mean, dude, I did the same thing like years ago. And speaking of polycount, this was, one of the things I like to show students all the time. Like when trains were like the big thing on ArtStation, I made the local BART station, and this is almost 10 years ago at this point. I'm like, I still have this thing, and I took measurements, I took drawing, I did everything I could on there because that's part of material and environments, is making sure that you are getting the most accurate information. And this series was me talking about that. So like I'm gathering reference, whether it's scale data or just color data, because you want to make sure you're using the most accurate thing. Because when people see this kind of tile, they think, oh, white. We'll just use the color white for that, which in materials, you don't do that. Like you definitely don't do full white, full black, because there's nothing realistic. Even if you're doing a stylized game, there's nothing in that world that's going to be pure white or pure black, except for the highlights and the shadows of your lighting. That's the only things you will ever see. That's those true colors. Even, well, Vanta black technically is like the closest thing to that, but it's like, who has Vanta black everywhere? Like that's not possible. So, understanding that, especially reference gathering is key. So like I'm taking photo references, and, if I don't have maybe I don't want to put a tape measure on the dirty, New York subway floor, guess what? I'm a size 12 shoe. I know how big a size 12 shoe is. I can use that as a size reference when I'm taking photo references for these things. So
Dude,
you don't
that's
have
like
to be a
another
weirdo.
level of reference gathering. That's so awesome.
Yeah, I'm meticulous
That's
on this.
awesome.
Like, I love just like, if I see a good surface, I'm like, especially I'll do even like these glancing angles, because like when you see these types of tiles, sometimes you're like, oh, that's so cool seeing like the roughness and something like this. And then even this one, this has like micro glaze cracks on the inside. Like, that's so interesting to kind of see. And like, I would never see that if I didn't look at it from like a glancing angle. And so, like, when I'm working on this, like the part 1 video just came out yesterday, but it's basically me going over like, hey, guess what? This is like a key thing to know that people tend to glance over, is like reference gathering. You need to gather so much like reference for everything to think about. Like, what does the tile look like underneath? Like when you're breaking and damaging, if you're going to do a like actual damage pass on this, you need to see how tiles physically crack themselves. Like, it's a bit of a work on there, but it's good to understand how all of this kind of comes together. And then, of course, you get some little, nice surface knowledge and information on here, which I've been seeing that Tristan, one of the material artists over at That's the Moon, he's in one of the chats right now. I'm like, I love this. I love that tile glaze that he worked on this for his material. It's so nice. And so you want that kind of detail work on here. But once you have that, gather reference next for your presentation stuff, because that's also another thing that most folks tend to not think about, is reference gather for your actual presentation work. And Star Wars Outlaws by far, I think, has some of the best simple, parametric like materials that are on just like a nice flat surface or like on a cylinder, and they're presenting with scale reference, which, they have that little, I don't even know what this thing is called at this point, but it's,
Creature
really
sidekick.
Cool. Yeah, creature sidekick. See, I only know one from Star Wars, and it's BD1. It's from the Jedi series. I'm like, I don't know this lizard looking thing. But then there's, of course,
They even have your color swatch in there too.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Macbeth color chart, they got it right here. And so it's cool to see. And then I love even this simple presentation from Vincent from his Substance Days presentation, because you can see you have a simple, like maybe not a sphere, but like a simple cylinder with a breakdown of the textures themselves, including all the materials you worked on for your project, and then just any other little extra things you want to present besides like a level shot and stuff. And like one of the reasons why I say to think about this stuff is because now in games, it's so like the industry is so bad when it comes to like job searching and stuff, that a lot of folks tend to not realize you have to be showing so much of your own work now. Like, you have to show exactly the methodology of your workflow, because you can't just only have a single image or 2 images now on a portfolio piece. You have to basically show that all the soft and hard skills that would it take to become like an associate artist in the industry. And for a lot of students, they don't do that due diligence. So when I see like a brick wall, how'd you make that brick wall? Did you use photogrammetry? Did you use substance? Did you just find this material on Megascans? Because that's also another thing nowadays, because some people can just use the texture assets from there. If you show your work, it can definitely be very fundamental, like in showing this entire kind of process, because guess what? Knowing the soft and hard skills that are necessary for the job that you're trying to apply for is key. And so I think that's kind of like one of the big things that a lot of these students, especially, we at GDC and stuff, like I know you guys were hounded at the substance mixer. So it's like, you can see that there's people that are always asking for this kind of feedback and stuff. And a lot of times I only see like the same questions and like every single time. And so like the YouTube series and all that stuff is my way of kind of answering it for not just one person, but for hopefully thousands of people if they have a chance to see it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a couple people in the chat who are familiar with your work and have complimented you on it and have questions, actually. So if you don't mind, actually, I was going to start asking a couple of these, if you don't mind, interrupt the presentation here.
No, it's all good.
Absolutely, my friend. And so next one up that we had, I don't think I'm skipping over anything. Obviously, Jacob, welcome.
There's just one from Shady a little while back. I can.
Okay, yeah. If you want to shoot that one, and then I'll ask the one that Steph posted from YouTube.
Yeah, a couple people in the chat luckily are jumping into it and answering as well. So you may not have experience with this, Hugh, but feel free if you do know or don't know, answer what parts you can, I guess. But Shady's asking if when it comes to creating materials for games versus film, if you have experience across both of the industries or understanding of it? Like, what are the differences in terms of, file formats or specifications, size limitations? Like, how much do the workflows differ? Basically, he's asking the whole process: asset preparation, optimization, how materials are integrated into the final production. Like, if you can just kind of summarize your understanding of the difference between materials and films and
Sure.
texturing versus games.
Yeah. So the only experience I have is when I was doing the hiring process for at PlayStation, because we interviewed a couple people from our Malaysia studio, and in that region they mostly do VFX. And so like the difference between most texturing that you see for VFX and film is, one, there's no sense of optimization for games. Games, we work with very strict texture resolutions. Like that's one of the first things. So that's where you start to see the differences. Like in film, they have no texture requirements. You can just do a 4K texture, even up to 8K textures for some assets. I mean, I remember seeing the VFX breakdowns for some of the materials for some of the like UDIMs, which is like UDIMs is a method of like having multiple UV sets basically within a single thing, and it's like each UDIM is a set of your full textures, but they're like at 4K or even 2K or however many resolution on it. So you're bringing in hundreds of textures for like some of these assets that are physically accurate. Like they have like an actual VFX object that is physically in the digital world, like could be 2 or 3 meters tall. You need to make sure that the texture detail matches that. So they're trying to texture with full accurate resolution to make sure you get like the pores of the character, the sweat on that character. Like they have to be very meticulous in that detail work on there, because they have to try and match realism accurately. So understanding, and of course the chart that I use, Macbeth color chart, is what they also use in VFX as well. So they use this to make sure that they get accurate representations from the real world that they can try and match to the VFX renders themselves. So the main difference is, of course, the limitations of the textures that we can use for games versus VFX. But if you can understand some of the other workflows, like knowing how to use a trim sheet, which is something that they don't use in film typically, knowing those other types of techniques is definitely a key kind of difference between the two.
I think, and I could be wrong. I guess it depends what they're rendering in, but I know oftentimes they're actually using a specular workflow instead of metallic, like PBR workflow, just because then the specular gloss workflow provides like better metal response compared to the metalness that's in the
So
just the black and white texture sets.
it's still PBR if you use specular gloss.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
difference, the difference is because with Unreal Engine, when you use metalness roughness, you have a limitation of the values for like basically everything has like the same plastic rough or the plastic specularity, versus like in the real world with specular gloss, you have like glass has a different one, or things in air are different than water, like various meticulous little variations on there. And that's kind of where substrate kind of comes into Unreal Engine, where they're trying to bring that back into games, but also in a much more convoluted sense. But it's definitely like, yeah, if you understand specular gloss workflow and you work in Unreal Engine, that's gonna be something you're not gonna be able to pick up on. But like even what's called like Disney, like they use PBR in their methodology, because that's where we get most of our shader work from nowadays. Like the BRDFs were based from Disney's work originally.
Yeah, I think that does a pretty good job of answering the question. Then what was the next one you were going to jump to, Greg? Otherwise, there was one more or two more I see from Steph that's actually coming through YouTube.
Yeah, I was
we
gonna
grab those.
yeah. I was gonna do dash tracking. This question, if that works, as long as that doesn't like derail us too much. It's a little bit different than what we're talking about. Okay, so what do you think about exposed parameters, SBSAR, where you can get as Jacob? Do you want to try to ask this, because I'm having a hard time with it a little bit?
Yeah, let me take a look.
Sorry about that. While you're taking a peek at that, Jacob, I'm going to let you kind of decipher it a little bit. I'm going to ask one that looks like it's a little bit straightforward, straight from YouTube that Steph posted. So it was from Aaron05. Do you think modular is now the base for every environment artist, even on the first job in the industry?
Oh yes, I mean,
environment artists.
It's definitely something fundamental to know. I mean, there's still going to be bespoke things that are made. I mean, um, before I got at Zero Matter, I was applying over at Sony Santa Monica because before the role I was at PlayStation, I was let go from. Basically, they have to understand modularity. They have to build all their level sets from there, but you also have to know how to make bespoke damage and various bespoke things. Like when Kratos gets thrown through a wall or something, you have to understand that you have to make some know how to make bespoke assets. So knowing the fundamentals of modularity is key because that's going to be what you're going to be using for most of the levels. But it's also good to know how to make some bespoke damage and work, when you can actually make real physical cracks and crater impacts and stuff whenever again Kratos gets thrown through something like he always does.
Yeah, on the kind of cracked and dirty and different variations of material types. I think that's what Dash Tracking is asking. So when you're creating these SPZAR files to be used in a production workflow, if they're to be shared across the team, um, are you making them in a way that you're incorporating all of the different variations in one SPZAR? So it's dirty, cracked, destroyed, and you can kind of just change the settings within there? Or do you usually kind of break it up and focus on one material type, like ceramic wall, and then another separate one for a cracked version and a separate one from there? I guess I think it sounds like he's asking how much do you try to cram into one versus when is it good to split them up and then just kind of blend between them?
It honestly, it's going to depend on two things of where it's going to end up being in. So what I'm going to get to down here is when I work on the tile material is these materials are going to be textured as a tileable inside of Unreal Engine. So I need to have specifically the texture set for the damage version and the clean version. I can't really have a slider between the two because I'm not going to be able to access that slider technically inside of Unreal Engine. So if you're going to be working more bespoke inside of Substance Painter, then that's where you would have those little parameters to change. Maybe you want the tile color to change. If you want it to be more blue instead of white, if you want more dirtiness or kind of water leaks and stuff, those little sliders to make those changes, you can use those inside of Painter because you'll be doing a lot of work inside of Painter itself versus inside of Unreal Engine.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it depends how your team works and then how they're going to be using the work that you're creating. If it's just going straight into the engine, you probably don't need it. But then if you're sharing it for different tool sets and for texture artists and for other people who might be using it in softwares outside of the engine, then it can be good to expose some of those things for them. Cool. Yeah, there's actually one more from YouTube as well from another viewer that we've had before. So it's awesome to see people continuing to come back. Genesis Aces Art. Yeah, Genesis Aces Art. He says, "Love your stuff, Hugh." He's been watching your stuff over the last few months. He's asking, are layer attributes being dropped as substrate moves forward? And would you use mesh painting for RGB with parameterized masters?
Parameterized.
Okay, so to break it down a little bit, the layer attributes is about material layering. So if you guys have not seen last week, I believe it was last week at this point, I did a presentation for Dynasty about material layering. And so how it works is you make your material using a layer asset, and then you would blend it together using a blend asset. With substrate's essentially a new methodology inside of Unreal Engine where everything is kind of supposed to be layered in a sense where if you want brick and then you want a coating of paints on top of the brick, you have to make the materials themselves, and then you have to try and use an accurate representation to blend the two, actually like a coating. And they use more physically accurate parameters. I don't necessarily think they're going to get rid of the layering, material layering part of it. I think they want to try and incorporate that into it because it's a more smarter UI. The problem is that as Substrate currently as it is, its performance is not the most savvy for using for a ton of different assets. You can make really good glass, for instance. You can actually have real nice coating of glass. You can make it diffuse, it's been brushed and all nice and foggy looking. But you can't really use it very well on if I want a fire hydrant with like a coating of paint on it and a coating of dirt and dust and stuff on it. You can't really do that right now. So they will eventually, unless they can find a smarter way to like, keep it nice and cheaper in performance. But I don't think they're going to get rid of like the layer attribute stuff. And then for the mesh painting thing, mesh painting is a way of texture painting, like inside as a mask, like vertex paint, but it's using for nanite assets. And that one, yeah, I would use like different parameters inside of the mask tool to make like little adjustments and stuff. Like I'll take vertex paint and I overlay like a noise texture on top of it to make sure that the paint doesn't just look like vertex paint where it just always looks like it's triangles. You can actually add like little like shapes, like if you want chipped paint or if you want like a more dirty type of overlay, you can actually change the textures on top of it.
Yeah, like basically what you would do in Substance to start blending the edges of things. You're kind of doing the same thing except in the engine at this point.
Yeah, basically.
And Shady's back. He's back again.
Shady's
are
back.
there?
I like that call out.
It's instantly heard it in my head. By the way, I was just
yeah. His question is: are there situations where you could use the photos you took to tile them and use them in the material making in a production environment, or how do you prepare that and the do's and don'ts of that workflow?
So that is called, well, it's usually we call them like photo material or like bitmap to material. So there was a program or even Crazy Bump, like, if we want to go back a little bit, Jacob, on that one. So what those programs were is you take a photo like of a tile. The problem is that the photo you take is not perfectly like flat and planar. So you'd first have to edit the photo to be perfectly flat, planar, so that there's no like curvature to it, because that's going to be like a big problem where you can't make it tileable. Then the next part is making it tileable so it's seamless to use. From there, then comes I have to generate the null map, which, your null maps can be fine. It's not going to be the best because it has to try and understand how the lighting works, like to make the shadows and the bumps and stuff. You can definitely use it to generate values. Like what I'll go over in a bit is like how we actually approach making a material from scratch inside of like Substance and stuff, where in some ways we actually use some textures in the authoring process. Like we'll use parts of the normal map and parts of the ambient occlusion map to help author the roughness or author the albedo, because you can use some of those values as like masks and stuff. But you can use a program like Crazy Bump, that's like the older one. Unreal Engine had a program called Bitmap to Material, but they've now kind of coalesced all that photo normals, photo material stuff into the Substance Sampler program, which I've used before, but it's mostly for studios that really don't have the time necessarily to make Substance Designer and just need to quickly generate some tileable materials that they can use on the fly. You can add some parameters to it, but for the most part, it's a very quick thing that it's kind of destructive in a way, because you can't really like reuse it in a sense after. You can make some parameters, but it's like really, you're kind of hard stuck on using a photo normal.
Yeah, something I've done when you do generate like height maps from stuff like that is then after generating it, you can either take it into Substance Designer or even ZBrush if you want to have a little bit more control over it. And then you just apply the height map to like a plane, and then you can come back and sculpt on top of it and kind of use almost like as a reference or like a block out for what you're creating, and then actually make it look the way it's supposed to. So it can still help you get you there, but oftentimes, yeah, you probably, like you said, don't necessarily want to use it as like an actual base or actually something in the engine. And it's funny you're talking about making sure that when you're taking the pictures or images for your textures, that it needs to be perfectly flat and like planar camera almost, because then a couple times when trying to capture textures of the ground and stuff, if you actually do that with a camera and you're trying to get enough of the ground so that it's a good tileable and it's not just like 4 tiles or 4 bricks or something. I've had to put my camera out on like a tripod
because
and like
you don't want to
hold
put
it
your
up
feet on there
really
basically.
high. Yeah, exactly. So that I'm just like a crazy guy with a tripod that I'm holding, like taking
Trust me,
pictures
you are
of the
not the
ground.
crazy person in this entire situation. I mean, it's the same thing I tell folks, like when I was on the BART. Like BART, you got buskers, you got all these people doing many different things, like on the train. I'm not the weird one when I have a tape measure out, just like measuring doors and stuff. Like honestly, You don't
Well,
look
they
weird.
probably just think you're there, like, servicing the subway or something, or
Someone
like
told me I should
yeah.
get a safety vest just for that reason, but it's like
Yeah.
I don't want also like point point to myself a little bit more with having a big orange reflective vest, basically.
That's
You might
pretty
get
awesome, though. You
questions. Might get questions.
yeah.
Yeah, you'll
You're
get
basically
different
like
kinds
a
of
spy
questions.
at that point.
Yeah. um, but yeah, I think so. One thing I also talk about in the video is like how we break down materials, because you don't just hop in and just make everything at once. You have to be fundamental in it. And so, like when I make this tile, you have to start off with the most fundamental shape in this case, which is this single glazed tile. I even like talk about how you have to look at like the bevel of how the tile works, because it's not just always a perfect square. There's curvature and stuff to it. Then that's where you can lead into your next thing, because you can take this and put it into sampling programs that can then make different types of patterns. Like you can make this, which is what we have for the subway, or you can make another simple square tile. And then whichever one you can choose, that's where you can start to make your parameters to kind of swap the different types of pattern, like, arrangements. Then start to add in some surface variation. Like you can start adding in like a little bit of like these chips and like little bits of wear and tear. You want to start going from like the large details to medium to small and other little bits of variation. Like even this one, like I'm starting to add some physical warbling on there, because like when you look at these close-ups of tiles, you'll see that some of them actually have like little bits of like kind of warbling. Like the reflections are not perfect. So you're going to start to see that like little surface variation happen, even if it's like very subtle. You even see up close, like, wow, there's like little small divots and imperfections during the glazing process of the tile. So you want to, get into the nitty gritty on this. But from there is when you can start to generate things. Like I generated out a height map just for the grout itself, because when I make the pattern, I can just invert it and use it as a mask so that I can generate the grout that goes between the tiles. And then combined together, you make your height map, which when you see from here to here, like why did this just get darker all of a sudden, is because I'm slowly trying to adjust the physical height of the material itself. And how we work in height typically is you have your 1, you have your 0. Typically, most people tend to think, oh, I'll just use the full range of gradient, basically. And you typically don't just do the full range of gradient. Like you don't just like have everything black to white. You have to think about like, okay, where's like my midpoint? Where's like the point where I don't have anything? Because if you have your bottom for your material be here, you can't go below 0. Like there's no negative black color. Like there's nothing that goes beyond that. So you have to have it at like a 0.5 value, because at this is kind of like your neutral level. You can then go up if you want to. You can then go down if you want to. So I'll use like a node called histogram range, which will bring the full black to white gradient and kind of sandwich it into something much, much smaller and thinner, making it a little bit more accurate. Because if you think about how like deep these tiles are, they're millimeters in thickness. Like it's not going to be like multiple inches, basically. And so from there, once you feel like you have everything with all the physical variations, the height changes and stuff, then you can take your height map and generate normal and ambient occlusion, because they're both height based. What these three textures refer to is kind of the geometry of the material. This is like where if you take out all the roughness, all the albedo, it's literally just the surface information of what it is. You can then add stuff to make it shinier or rougher. You can make the tile red, green, or blue. But for the most part, this is the geometry of the mesh or of the material, if you want to think about it in like mesh sense. And then from there, you can use data from all of these to then generate your roughness. So like I have a bunch of like wet leaks and small cracks and stuff in here because you want to have little imperfections. And then of course, add all that dirt in there because it's a New York subway. It's going to be dirty as hell. So you want to make sure that you get all that in there. And then from there, we generate the material. And that's what it will typically look like here on like a cylinder. And then if you want to check out and test things, there's some really interesting, cool things you can do where you make like a specular test where all it is just you turn the albedo black, and that allows you to kind of really see the roughness in particular. So you can actually see how shiny the surface is and how it's actually reacting, versus the clay render, which the clay render takes out the albedo and takes out the roughness aspect of it. So you can actually see how the geometry itself is rendering. So all of this makes up how we make these basically like these basic materials. You can then export this out into your engine of choice, like Unreal Engine, or you can even be like me inside of Designer, where I can take my subway tile and I can drag the entirety of the subway material into here so that I can then make a damage version of it. So let's hope that this does not slow down me too much. Apologies. I'm trying to load up Substance Designer at the same time.
Someone's actually asking if you have like good methods or workflows for optimizing your materials, which is perfect for right now when we're having to load massive materials inside of
Yeah.
Substance.
So the way you can optimize is there's a couple different ways of doing this. Sorry, it's gonna load no matter what. It's when you open up anything, it has to output every single node basically on here. And so I have this like really damaged looking kind of tile right here. And the way you can optimize is a couple different things. So one, I'm texturing at a 4K texture resolution. Of course, that is not how it's going to end up being inside the game engine. Trust me, you can. There's no game nowadays besides like maybe a PC build that's going to have 4K. So that's where you have to think about kind of what is your texel density of the project that you're working in. If you work in a first-person shooter, then you need to be very close up. And most first-person shooters tend to do like maybe 1024 for a texture resolution as like the highest for a 1 meter tile. Then if you're a third person, because third person, you're not going to be as close to the surfaces, then you would use half that resolution. If you're very specific and you like to, play RTSs, which are more kind of higher up, like The Sims or something, you wouldn't probably even use a 512. You would probably use a 256 texture resolution. So depending on the game that you're working on, you'll have a specific texture resolution to work in. That's kind of like the first thing, because you can have all of your texture memory very easily with this, but then you have to start thinking about channel packing, which is like another method. So what channel packing is in most games nowadays, you have things like texture samples. And essentially, when you're making a material, you have you can put as many textures as you want to the project, but a sample itself is when you draw the material onto a surface, it has to then pull and reference every single texture. And if you have, say, 6 textures and each one of them is like 4 megabytes, that's 24 megabytes per material draw call, essentially, which can be really expensive. And nowadays, we have pretty powerful graphics cards, but we also have millions of geometry too. And so you typically don't want to have all of your texture memory go just to the textures, or you want more of the VRAM to go to like equally everything and not just like one or like the other. And so we tend to cut back on the necessary textures by using channel packing, which what it does is you take these textures, which some of them are grayscale and some of them are color, which that's what the gold here is and what the silver here is. You can take the grayscale textures and you can put them together into a color image. So you can take 3 to 4 textures into one single color texture. And instead of having 6, you now maybe have 3 or even 2 in some instances. So it makes things much cheaper to have. You can half the memory on that as well too. Then, of course, just using modular textures where you can reuse them more and more as they're referenced. They don't get referenced technically again. So the less textures, the less the less VRAM being used, basically.
For optimizing like the Substance Designer scene itself, besides just maybe like the load times or seeing how long it takes for changes to appear, is there ever any other reason to optimize your actual Substance Designer graph and not necessarily the output for the engine side, but just your Substance Designer graph itself?
Yeah. So what you can do is like,
But I guess I also want to make sure that I'm asking: is it necessary?
It's only necessary
And,
if
and
you're
not
if you're having a hard
necessarily.
time.
Yeah.
It's necessary if you're having a problem with it, like because it's from the authoring side of things, and knowing that, like, hey, guess what? You may have a very powerful PC, but some people on your team may not, or maybe they have other things going on. Like, because sometimes there are instances where maybe the rendering team and the design team have completely different specs on their PCs when they're building, because rendering has the need for all this like rendering stuff, so they need high VRAM. Designers probably don't necessarily need it, so they might have a different configuration because we know how expensive PCs are nowadays, so we can't really have everyone have 5090s on everything. So if you're having an issue or your team's having issues where like someone is making these like extreme substance materials, start looking into where you can kind of optimize it a little bit. If you are only focusing on like working through texturing through like texture sets inside of Unreal Engine using tilables versus like if you use your textures inside of Substance Painter, then you don't need as many little switches and doodads for like changing the color or changing the pattern, changing this. So you can start to reduce the need for some of these actual textures essentially. You can even also lower down the resolution if you want to. Like this lowers down the whole parent resolution because maybe you don't even necessarily need 4K. That will have your VRAM budget on just this, because what this does is it changes the resolution on every single one of these guys. It's not just like you have one 4K or one 2K or one 4K resolution for the whole thing. It's every single node has to be calculated in this pixel resolution because it does change the way certain things even look themselves. And I think that's one thing that you need to also make note of is maybe you can work in a 1024 to 2048 resolution, but go into 4K just to check what it's going to end up looking like, because the export themselves will look different. The other thing is just trying to find a way to maybe use maybe a different render, because I'm using a raster view where you can actually even switch over to like a GPU render or even just the old OpenGL one. So it might just be you need to change some of the rendering settings on here because you don't technically need to have the most high quality render for this guy. You can just use that like for Marmoset or for Unreal Engine.
Do you ever just try to hook some nodes up blind and see like how good you are? Like maybe you can come up with material without seeing.
I feel like I want to try to do that, but it's like, having your cat try and time something out. I'm like, you're not going to be able to get something out of it necessarily. Like I've tried. Like,
don't worry. I don't need a serious answer. It was also just like put a blindfold on.
But it's funny because it's like it's weird because like you technically do have like we all have muscle memory. Like all of us who game, we have WASD on like as our first muscle memory of like when we move stuff around. And WASD is used for moving around in games as well too. So it's like we have that muscle memory to just naturally do this or that. That's why I always hated 3ds Max, because the UI and the way it worked was different than Maya and then any other program basically that had the WASD workflow for stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of serious, but mostly a joke. I guess it would be good to ask from someone here as well. We haven't seen in the chat before, so I want to get a couple new people for questions.
Sure.
I believe the name is Reshmi Pakira, and they're asking for a VR game where assets and materials need to be more optimized. How would you suggest approaching a wall or ground material, especially for exterior when you're considering like, VR needs to run really smoothly. And for example, like if vertex painting is too expensive for VR, are there alternative approaches for blending materials and still getting like, proper tiling and texture quality for it?
Yeah. So in VR, we had a huge change from Asgard's Wrath 1 to Asgard's Wrath 2, where Asgard's Wrath 1 was made with the Rift, which is basically piggybacked off your PC. So we actually had like, we could kind of do whatever we wanted. Like we had a lot more because it was just depending on the min spec of the PC. Asgard's Wrath 2 was rendered and handled with the Quest headsets, which are, in my opinion, is almost like as powerful as like a PS2 or PS3 in some instances of it. Like it's not as powerful as it used to be. So we were very strict because VR is also very different performance-wise than a game does. Most games, you either have to do 1920 by 1080 resolution at about 60 FPS for the current generation, or you do 4K resolution at 30, fidelity versus performance type of thing. VR has to be at least 75, in some cases to 90 FPS, and it has to be technically a little lower than 1080, but it has to be rendered 2 times, so it can be a little expensive. So you have to know what kind of platform you're using, but also that like, hey, guess what? You might have to use a different texture resolution. So you might use, say, a 1024 texel density, like, keeping your textures, like, finding what we could do to reuse. In Asgard's Wrath, we ended up honestly baking our PBR down to albedo only and having just a normal map to help with shadows. Like we went old school with it, where we would do our textures. Like we would have some stuff done in Designer, but then in Painter, we would use one of those like baked albedo filters that would just take all your PBR values into the material itself. But we would just try not to render specular highlights or try to render certain shadows like in a directional type of methodology, thereby reducing the need for some textures. So kind of cut back on the need for textures using like channel packing too. That could be a part of it. If vertex painting is a noticeable thing for your, being too expensive, you can try and use very low resolution but somewhat blurry textures, like for masks, and you can use them channel packed. Because the reason why I say blurry is because you can always add a sharpness or like a contrast node inside of like your graph node, so you can actually sharpen it back from being a blurry, thing, and then you can actually use that as like a way to help with masking and stuff. But to maintain proper tiling and texture quality, it's making sure you just have a consistent texel density on the assets. And then if there's some assets far away that you're not going to see, give them really low resolution textures.
Would it make sense at that point adding like detail maps on top, or does that start to increase like the amount of GPU power necessary also with the shader, or is that like a
It
good
depends. I
workaround?
think you can do like maybe an ambient occlusion detail map and a normal map diffusion one, but it's going to depend on the type of surfaces. But you then have to think about, okay, if I have wood, stone, fabric, like all these different types, I have to have extra textures for every single one of them. And so like even if they're maybe like a low resolution, you will get texture samples for each and every one of them for different materials. So I think that's like where the problem kind of lies basically. So it really just depends on the type of game too, because games like Beat Saber like are in a very stationary type of thing. But if you're doing like an open world VR kind of game, those are tricky to do because you have to almost do it like linear, like kind of like an Uncharted type of game, because you can't really go back to an open world. Like that was one of the reasons why also we had a lot of hard technical issues for Asgard's Wrath. That's why we stuck to PBR only for a lot of assets, because we wanted to have that open world aspect of the game for like coming back after like in like Metroid style games.
Yeah, when you're doing that, are you even incorporating like the lighting into the albedo itself to avoid, like you said, using specular or highlights and stuff, or you didn't go that far?
We thought about it, but the problem is that for VR, some assets are interactable, so we can't really have a directional type of highlight.
Mm.
So that's where the problem is. And like, if you like, we were even strict on like, okay, if we have certain level assets that like we know you're never going to see the other side of, we would have to manually make LODs, and we'd have to manually like cut out the backs of like some of these assets to kind of cut back on the texture resolution. Like at some point, some of the assets were 256 on texel density for 1 meter of data, which is very low. But we're trying to
Wow.
like doing what we can, and we had like very strict triangle like limitations on there as well, because we have to do Quest 2 and Quest 3. Now the newer Quest headsets that Meta was working on, and I mean I'm assuming like it might also be different now with the headsets for what's it called for Steam. It might be very different on how those things are, but it really kind of just depends.
Yeah, that's always the case. You kind of have to even start to art direct the optimization a bit, and like how can
Mm-hmm.
you make it look like it's on purpose and make it still work within what you're trying to do there. Um, Coming back to a question from Yassine, they're asking a lot of games more recently, like Black Flag Resynced, are making the same material twice, one version that's more pristine and one that's more damaged. Um, and then why has this workflow taken precedent compared to using like unique materials that include the destruction or deformation as like a unique material? And yeah, is this something that you would say is a good workflow to use? And how do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so, when you think about this, think about it in the realm of like what kind of game it is. Black Flag is an open world game, mostly set on an ocean with like, it's a pirate game. So you're gonna have like water physics and all these other like additional things on top of it. You're probably gonna have huge crowds. So there's performance reasons to want to have like limitations on the unique textures, like having a clean slate and a broken slate. Because what's also good is you can have other states like, added cracks or added dirt on top of it by using vertex painting and other types of like blending on top of it. So you can use that with some height to help blend them all together, because you don't need a dirty version of the tile. You don't need a cracked version of the tile. You just need a damaged version of it, so that you can then overlay these kind of not really unique, but like they're very generic types of dirt and damage on top of it. So you can kind of reuse it everywhere, basically.
And there's kind of a fun one from Galena, which is, do you have a favorite node combination in Designer? And I can start off. I almost always plug like everything into a levels, and then the levels into like a blend node, so that I could blend between a more contrasty version or less. And I'm just always controlling everything pretty
I
much
use that
with
for
levels.
I do a little illegal PBR stuff where I do blend a little ambient occlusion and curvature on top of my stuff, just because guess what? I mean, it's a game. It can be a little stylized if you want to. So like that's what I do. But sometimes like in Unreal Engine, we don't have full control like with the blend node where you have like the opacity. So I'll have like a multiply of the ambient occlusion with the albedo and then just the albedo, and then I'll lerp between the two so I can have like a control between like the strongest and the weakest. Um, I definitely think my two favorites are definitely, of course, like I mean, every person has. I mean, I love all Floodfill. Floodfill is like one of my favorite ones. Floodfill is so much fun. Like the fact that you can take something like this and then you can make like random grayscale, or you can make gradients and stuff like that. Like Floodfill's really fun. There's, of course, also slope blur, because everyone loves a slope blur. Like that's where y'all add all like the cracks and facets of everything. Because what slope blur does is it takes the soft blur and you can add a noise overlaying inside of the calculation, so that it actually starts to facet and create like when you chip away like rock or something. So it looks really interesting, and it's only just two basic nodes. But then my other little
But can I give a call out that
sure.
be careful with slope blur? Like I feel like it can also be one of those things that you can spot really easily, because it kind of around like the blurred edges, it kind of creates these little chunky patterns almost, depending on the scale that you're using your slope blur at.
Yeah, that's where
Uh,
I actually have a what's it called? I use the noise, and I have a tiling transform so I can scale the noise higher and not lower, because I want larger shapes and not smaller little like micro things. Because I think that's where some people tend to think is they go big real quick, basically.
Yeah. I'll almost every single time, like if I'm gonna use a slope blur, I'll mask out the section that I'm using the slope blur around the edges, and then have like either a warp applied on top of that or a directional warp applied on top of that, just so I'm like hide the slope blur, hide the slope blur.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
that's where you kind of have to keep adding in more and more stuff on there. Like it's, it's one of those things. Like you just have to keep knowing how you can kind of hide that stuff, because that's also what some people tend to do is they tend to like use the same stuff over and over again, and that's where the problem is. Like guess what, like you want to try and hide that you're using this particular thing, because we as designer like game like the texture designers essentially have seen this stuff so many times, so we'll notice it. And I remember there was one student of mine that was actually using Substance Painter, and he was using all those like normal like stamp decals. I'm like, I know every single one of those ones. You either got to make it yourself or you got to hide it somehow, because I know what they all
yeah.
look like.
Like I still cringe every time I'm watching even a movie or some like major production, and in Substance Painter, when you use just the metal edgeware and you turn the grunge up, there's like this very specific kind of like scratchy looking pattern that it just duplicates and rotates around everywhere. And I'll see that like in like major movies on an entire surface, and I'm like, oh my god, they didn't even try on this thing. I mean, at the same time, don't get me wrong. I understand, production sometimes you have tight deadlines and you're like, just add a metal edgeware on it or something. But even then,
Yeah.
like, come on, please, just like do another cloud overlay multiply on top of that to hide or something. But yeah, basically just hiding everything that everybody knows, and like texture grunge map 12 for metal with the nice scratches. And I'm giving away all the secrets, which is great, so that then people can
I mean,
avoid
at
making
this
those
point, like,
noticeable.
there's not really any secrets necessarily. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly also like it because, like, guess what? It gets people like, hey, now you know those. Now we can make newer, cooler ones, basically.
And that's where, like you were saying, if you create something inside of Substance Designer and you expose the right parameters in it in your SBazaar, then you can use that inside of Substance Painter and spread it out to your other teammates and stuff too.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like, I always tell them, like, it's always good to know all this stuff, because guess what, you can then learn to do something different. Because when I tell students, even as well, like when you do nodes, you don't always have to use this particular way of this particular thing. Like there's many different configurations that you can do, that you don't have to do exactly the same like someone else does. Like there's like almost 1,000,001 ways to do something a little different. Like the pattern that I even made to generate the tile, there's like 4 or 5 nodes that you can use to make a tile sampler with that. So you can kind of choose it one way or another. It just kind of gives you the kind of convergence between the two.
Yeah, and I guess 2 more questions that we have here. Well, just wanted to give a call out really quick too to Alejandro Martinez. It was pretty funny when we were talking about making environments a bit smaller and making it more approachable. Then they're like, "All right, I'm going to do an open world environment."
He's doing it to spite us. That's what he's doing.
Just out of spite. He's like, "Oh, now I'm going to make my world even bigger. Good luck."
Yeah, spite-driven environment art. I love it.
Super solid.
But then there's a great question too, which is like how to tell what noise belongs in your height versus what's in your normal versus roughness map. And I'll let you go because I have some strong opinions on that. And I want to hear someone else.
So like how I describe it is, height maps should not have high frequency noise to it. Like it shouldn't be like, I don't need to see the cracks. I don't need to see, like, unless it's like a large physical crack, I don't need to see the small micro ones. Think of it almost like if you're applying displacement and tessellation to the surface, you don't want to have all these little tiny, like small micro things in there. I even actually, like, if you go to like any of the height maps I work on, I blur them. I blur them very subtly at the end, because when you work on like making a height map, if you have such a harsh change between one height value to another, you're going to create those like stretching on displacement, and you don't want that. So any kind of large and maybe even medium details that are like physical silhouette geometry, height map. Normal map and roughness, that's where you put that noise change on there. Especially for roughness, you just want to make sure that it's not too extreme, and that's where you have to test it out in the level where it's supposed to be. So that's kind of where all that kind of information should end up lying.
I knew I liked you. Yeah, you're right on track.
Jacob very quietly kept his
and Javier have these.
Put you on the spot for it.
Javier have late night conversations about materials like this stuff all the time. We're like, why do my students keep doing this? And we keep telling them, don't do this. Don't do it that way. That's not the right way to do it.
No, as soon as you started answering, I was like, I just leaned back from the mic and I was like, he's got this.
The kids are going to be all right.
Exactly what he's talking about.
It's a good video.
Yeah, he's a professional.
Yeah, all right. I know we're probably coming up on time a little bit, Hugh, so I'm sorry to keep you hostage here, but we have a couple more questions if you still got a little bit more time. Where was the next one? Jacob, did you get through? No. Okay.
There's, I think, one more I see there from Vedant.
There it is.
Vedant.
So, Hugh, what steps do you take? I believe is what they're asking for sharp details in base colors. They see many senior material artists recommending not adding too sharp of details. I think you were kind of alluding to this a little bit earlier, but I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah. So again, sharp details, it's going to depend. I mean,
I guess real quickly to jump in, it's important to make sure we mentioned that he's saying, or that they're saying it's specifically in the base color. So like in the albedo, and not necessarily for just roughness or normals, but in the base color, the sharp details.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. So basically, how it should kind of work is if you are looking at your detail work, because like, so albedo is one of the ones that you can kind of get away with it being either maybe a tiny bit more lower resolution or giving it a little bit more of the compression. That's one of the reasons why the BC format that they give is like one of the most like cheapest ones, because albedo doesn't necessarily need to have like super high frequency detail. Like you don't want your like albedo maps to be too on the nose. Like it shouldn't just automatically read like the yellow paint like in a game. Like it should just be looking good. It should be at a PBR value that is not too bright, not too dark, just enough to give the physical read from a far off distance. Because if you can't see the roughness or like the normal map of a surface from like far away, like the albedo is like the next call out. Like if I see like terracotta materials, I'm like, oh, I'm going to see that red brown from that way. I know what I'm looking at basically. So it really depends on like what type of kind of material should it actually kind of read to. And then when you get closer, you would use like normal map and roughness. Those ones are supposed to be technically the sharpest of the details you're going to have, basically. And that's the reason why normal map has its own compression format, and same thing with roughness. Roughness, typically, even with channel packing, we tend to put it in the green channel because of the bit value, but also there's a thing within color range information that we give to the green channel because our eyes typically see green better than anything else. Red and blue are typically the ones that we have color color blindness issues with. So green is typically the one that actually has like more of a sharper conical like eye read to it. So that's why we give the green channel typically to roughness in a channel pack versus like ambient occlusion, which is very blurry, and metallic, which is just a typical mask.
And I guess it's also like if anybody just kind of, I guess, coming back to like the noise and using it across the different aspects of your material, it can be nice on occasion after blurring, the initial scratches and the things that can go into your height map and your normal map, um, to allow some of the original sharper details to come back through if you're doing like a 0.001 blend almost on them, to get just some of the subtle scratch down the middle, and then like blended blur on the side and things like that. That can be nice, but it's oftentimes just better to blur them out in general. And most of the time too, like your materials won't even see a lot of these sharp details because you're having to optimize, or you're having to downscale from a 4K to like a 1024. And so unless it's for a personal portfolio piece or a material ball, how many times are you even going to really notice like the super sharp details themselves anyways?
Yeah, I mean, even Vedant brought up like a little follow up on it about like where do you draw the line on it. It's like it's also, think about this on an albedo sense. Albedo is not going to be the thing you're going to fully see only. You're going to have roughness, you're going to have normal maps, you're going to have ambient occlusion all on top of it. So that's like the last layer that you're going to see, typically even close up, where you would actually want to see these close up details for these things. You're never going to see the true information, even in the fact that albedo will have like the most compression it's going to have. So it's not going to be even the best quality to begin with. So you can have it be sharp in some ways, but it doesn't have to be like you don't have to be like I'm going to crank up contrast on everything. You just have to make sure that from a surface standpoint, especially as like when you're in the player's perspective, does it read well? Do you know what you're looking at on it? And if the details aren't super sharp, then that's fine because you have other sharp maps like a roughness or a normal map that you'll see that stuff on the other angles you're going to see it from. So you don't necessarily have to have crunch on everything of it. You don't really even want to have a super contrasted looking kind of material like that. It's not going to look pretty.
Yeah, and that's where there's always something that one of my instructors had brought up in the past about like areas of rest when it comes to art pieces that you're working on. So even if it's going to be an entire environment, and you have like a super detailed prop that's like the hero prop, then maybe around it and surrounding it you'll have like a very simpler soft dirt, or like just simple concrete floor or something, so that the focus can be on the important details. And that's very similar as it comes to materials. So some materials are going to have lots of detail, and like rust is going to have tons of normal map information and bumps, and lots of like shadow that come from that type of material. And then you can contrast that with like a nice paint layer that's kind of getting worn off with the rust next to it. And so that's where you do need to consider what type of material is it. Does it need these fine grain details? And then how can you make it kind of stand out and feel natural next to the materials around it? And yeah, so each material type kind of has their own specs and specifications, what's important there too. And then it might be good to say that that's potentially a difference between games and films. with that in mind, where, as we said, in games, oftentimes all these things are being crunched down so much and optimized, and the textures are so low res that maybe the detail and the noise could be considered differently or approached differently, to a degree, in films, where you're still going to have all those crisp details to show off, something like I said with Rust, but then it still needs to be artistic. And if you just have complete noise and detail and scratches on everything, then that's not going to look good either. So even if you do have the resolution and have the capabilities to have all of that detail in your textures, then it might not be good visually for someone to look at unless you're doing it in a smart way.
Yeah, it's also like when I even show
I just wanted to
folks like
smooth out my camera by turning it off right there.
no, you're all
See,
good. I love
shows a
seeing
visual contrast.
I just love seeing the no video CEO. I love that. It's so awesome to see.
Yeah.
That's definitely a good Halloween costume. But yeah, no, I like the also like another approach to it is when you look at games like Sony Santa Monica, like for God of War, like they're ZBrush focused, so they're very geometry hardened. And when you look at theirs, like, they make sure that their height maps and normal maps look really pristine because that's where most of the geo is going to be. So they have very nice large reads for the large and medium details. And then they'll have maybe some kind of smaller tilables of like rock and stuff that's going to be more where like the smaller and medium stuff is. But when you look at the surfaces, you still don't get too over focused on the high frequency. Like it's not too noisy necessarily. So again, it just comes down to the reads of how this surfaces look, whether it's from the geometry standpoint or from the actual like roughness and normal standpoint to it.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell like you've definitely got a background in sharing your knowledge, for sure. Because, I mean, look at me fumbling over my words, just trying to express that idea. But then I can see, yeah, you're very clearly able to express a lot of your ideas, and I think I'm gonna have to check out your YouTube channel after this as well.
Strong recommended for anybody watching.
No,
Yeah.
that's why I love seeing that, because it's like, again, Jacob, I've going from the industry, like I knew who you were and stuff, and it's like I'd see some of the work that you had to post, and so it's like I was always inspired by kind of stuff like that. So it's really cool to see when they say don't meet your heroes, I'm like, you can meet some of them. It's great. It's great because it's like, guess what? Now they can follow you on YouTube and stuff. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm really happy about like things like that. And it's like, if it's someone like you or just any of the students here, or even like my students, I tell them like, watch my videos. Like you don't have to pay for tuition technically with these videos. You just go and get on there. Like I do this stuff for free, whether you do the mentorship with me here or not. The videos themselves are just really helpful additionals basically to it.
Yeah.
I think we're lucky to be in an industry where so many of the people are really good people too. And I don't know if that just comes from like the community aspect that gamers have in general. But I can't really think of anybody off the top of my head that I've ever had a bad experience when I finally met like an artist that I've always seen for so long. Just everybody is so friendly and like sharing knowledge. And anytime I'm going to mixers at GDC, or if I'm meeting up with people, hopefully I'm sure I'm going to run into some awesome people at Gamescom as well. So, it's great to be able to meet people like yourself, and now we're working together, and then now we're all sharing knowledge with each other and making YouTube videos together. And it's just, it's really fun. And so, yeah, like, I think we're in a great industry at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing I've also noticed too, and I talk about it almost every single time, is like you're telling people to go to your YouTube. It's like, hey, the content's free. What we've noticed is like, dude, it seems like so many talented artists are those people who do that take the initiative, that go out and find the info. And then they work with somebody like yourself on the one-to-one basis, Hugh, when it's like they're putting together that final project. They're finally trying to tie it all together. And so they want that live sort of feel. But the folks that seem to do the best are the ones who do both. They do the stuff on their own, and then when it comes time that they're trying to put the cherry on top and really kind of break through, that's where we see a lot of people benefit from that mentorship once they've acquired a big amount of the skills, the skills that they'll need.
Yeah, because like one of the things is that like everyone's gonna have a pain point, especially for on like say like in the grasp of materials of things. Sometimes it's Substance Designer. Sometimes it's just understanding how you should author your materials through like Substance Painter. And then there's also, how do I manage lighting or environment work with it? Because I know lighting is always a big pain point. That's why like I really wanted to hammer in that the last few videos I did were like on YouTube were about lighting, about baked lighting is not dead. You can still use baked lighting in Unreal Engine, what Lumen is, and kind of what we can do to try and help focus on things like that. So like these key things is like why, like for materials, it's like if there whatever your pain point is for that, these one-on-ones should be about that. It's not like I'm going to make a general video for everybody or a general mentorship for everybody. It's more like, what is it that you as an artist is having a hard time with? Is it, the UI itself? Is it just the methodology of how you make materials? Is it just, these other basic things? Is it even shaders too? Because that's also another thing that some folks tend to have an issue with, because it's like they can be very technical, but they don't know how to kind of showcase that technicality in a game standpoint. Like, I made this really cool shader, but it's like, how did you present that shader? Like, is it something with like some really cool and interesting things on there? Like, you want to try and think about all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for going through so many like aspects of your process and just like thought processes in general. And I feel like actually with this live stream, we got a lot more questions even than normal too. So I can definitely tell, material art is a hot topic and there's a lot of people interested in it, or maybe just a lot of people that haven't had the chance to work in it enough coming from, using Megascans or an environment background. And so I think, yeah, this has been really awesome for sure.
Yeah, we're still getting more questions, by the way. I'm seeing in the chat.
Yeah, I'm seeing some comment, but I don't want to keep you locked up here all day.
I can
a couple of these
probably-
questions are.
Yeah, I can answer
seems like
probably
we
like
answered a
these, like,
little bit
last two.
earlier.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one of them is the presentation one. So how do you present the material balls and cylinders? I have a little kind of example here. The way I would present it is something like this. Cylinder is one thing, but you want to break down what the textures are and what they look like, especially like the main four: albedo, normal, your height, and your roughness. Those are kind of the key aspects of them. But not only this, you want to have almost like a small kind of like scene to render this on. Even like when you look at like my scenes, like the terracotta material, it's all done in the aspect of like, here's a nice, what looks like a small rendered scene, basically, with some simple shadows and some nice lighting. You can even throw in the little human scale reference like everyone else does. And that's because you want to do essentially this, where you showcase the scale of the object and almost feel like, hey, I'm just taking a little slice of the cake, basically. So that's what you want to kind of do in this. Don't just like only have this one thing and that's it. Showcase the breakdowns for everything, even whatever else you want to pad in there, whether it's showing your reference work, if there's any shader work along the way. That's kind of how you should approach like the presentation aspect of it. And then let's see, the last one is, as an environment artist, do you think it's worth leaning more into the technical side to stand out from other candidates, or is it better to focus primarily on showcasing strong environments in the portfolio? I mean, Jacob, I know you have a big, background in environments, but I mean, I've definitely, you can agree, having some technical, display is great. Like, especially because like a lot of times, like when we work with juniors, they sometimes don't know like vertex painting very well, or they don't understand the aspects of how to use it very effectively, or like even knowing how to use a trim sheet very well. So I think, if you can showcase a little bit more of that hard skill of like using other smart techniques and stuff, and if you know how to make it yourself, then add a little extra brownie point to it. But I think knowing a little bit more about on the technical side is good. You don't have to go into like how to use like blueprints or PCG.
I think it's important, if you're going to be showing that type of stuff off as well, that the work you're showing alongside it is really high quality to begin with. So still being necessarily the focus that it's nice to be able to showcase that you have additional skill sets and you're able to do like more technical side, and that does help you stand out as an environment artist. But hopefully, at least the work you're presenting it with, it's really high quality modeling, it's really high quality lighting and rendering, and the composition and things still feel nice within it. So ensuring that whatever you're showing off, no matter if it's the technical side or if it's just a simple environment, that it looks good in the end. Because it's like, if you make a really cool tool and it's super useful, but then you're showing it off with work that's like subpar, it's maybe not getting across the idea that you're hoping it will. And even maybe the tool itself could be incredibly useful to so many people, but you'll really kind of like drive the point home that, hey, look, not only did I make this tool, but it helps me to create this incredible piece and this incredible render alongside it. So I would just always also bring that back to say, like, make sure the art is there. And if you want to show that technical side, it can be like a nice cherry on top. Unless your main focus itself is on the technical side of things, then that's okay to have maybe the art not necessarily be the most outstanding art ever. But if it's like your main focus is art and you do some technical, art should be good. If you do mostly technical, then it should be incredibly workflow changing, like life changing type of tech, and the art can be okay.
It's beautiful. What else, gents? Comments, concerns, thoughts, pressing feelings?
I got everything I have out of that. Hopefully everyone's got all the questions. I mean, if anyone has any other kind of questions, I mean, I'm now also inside of the Sierra Division Discord. If you want to reach out to me there, you totally can. If you guys want to, we got a mentorship available. So I can always answer your questions there.
So excited to hear more. We're very, very, very excited to be working with you as part of our mentorship. This is our first venture into material art mentorship. And to be honest, I'm not sure I could think of somebody more knowledgeable. I think, Hugh, this has been so impressive getting to talk to you and hear you express your knowledge, be able to kind of flex a little bit and show off your skill set, and also getting to see the two of you kind of talk as well is fun because you get to see both sides of it. And to where it's how do the two come together, and that's where a lot of our questions ended up kind of coming up as well. Is how do I incorporate this into my normal workflows, or maybe how should I even consider this? How do people get into it? I think that there were some great questions. I think you both handled them perfectly. This has been awesome. And so no parting questions. Anybody that I've missed? I think we got just about everything. I'm double checking here just to be sure.
Everyone just wants to say thanks and, great talk, and Hugh's awesome and lots of insights. And
people have designer open. We're working while you were talking.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the working with talking part. I'm like,
yeah, dude, that's awesome. This has been
I pretended to have camera problems so that I could actually be trying everything in Substance while we're here. Like, oh, that is kind of cool. Let me give that a go.
Take rapid notes real fast. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Next time. Well, this has been awesome, folks. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hugh, super excited to be working with you as a mentor. So if y'all are working with, looking forward or interested in working with Hugh one-on-one, you're welcome to reach out. His mentorship is live on our website at academy.sierradivision.com. And so if you'd like to go check that out, see if this is something that you might be interested in, or if you have a different length of mentorship you might be interested in, you don't like the offers that you see currently, just reach out to me. I can help you with those. But without any further delay, keeping you guys any longer, I appreciate you. Thank you so very much. On behalf of the entire team here at Sierra Division, on behalf of Hugh and Jacob, thank you for joining us. Until next time. Appreciate you, folks.
Thank you,
have
everyone.
a good one. We'll see you then.